Well, good evening, everyone, and just chiming in here to give a little bit of an update from my perspective at City Council here in St. John, as well as just answer any questions about what's been going on around the city. Try to give my perspective on what's been happening politically in the past 3 months. It's been a bit of a hiatus for me around doing these. Definitely been busy with a number of things, including renos here at the house, whether it be some of the initiatives we've been doing at the tool library, a little bit of council stuff. Council tends to be a little bit quieter late July, early August. So there's a good 3 weeks there that we are a little quiet, but wanted to get back on here before we kick off the new school year and just start the conversation around what's been happening around our city, province, country. There's the world. It's like everything is kind of culminating into a broader discussion around how we do things, why we do things the way we do, who gets to be at the table to make decisions about them, and the whole bit. So I am just going to bring up some comments here. I want to make this a bit of a more of a dynamic, a bit more of an open discussion, um, an ask me anything, if you will. So it is certainly your chance to chime in with questions. If they're inappropriate, I will certainly say as much. I'll address them as best I can. And we may disagree, but certainly willing to have that conversation. I just want to make sure that everything, before we go any further, I'm just going to be on my phone here for just a quick 20 seconds just to make sure everybody's streaming in. I know we're going to be on Twitter. We're going to be on Facebook and YouTube for this. I am trying to get us into a place where there's a good LinkedIn stream. Been having some good conversations with people who are doing different things in and around our city, province on LinkedIn lately. So that's kind of one of those social media streams that I haven't been on as much. So after that, just give me 1 second here. We'll get right into it. Looks like everything's good on Twitter and looks like everything's good on Facebook. All right. So I wanted to jump right into it. And, the elephant in the room for me, for sure, is this Brown House, right? The Pinkinski House, the King Street building that JDI owns, that we had this major public hearing on. We had a ton of public engagement on, a ton of public outcry on, and for good reason. Let's just say that. And I've certainly been criticized by a few different sources for not having a vote, for recusing myself from the voting process. And I explained myself on 3 different occasions, but the media didn't care to really pick up on it, as well as, the way council works. When you recuse yourself from a public hearing, it's done at the beginning of a council session. So when that time comes, it could be an hour later, it could be 2 hours later for that public hearing component. All of a sudden, I just stand up and disappear from the room. Why is that? Well, one, anybody who knows me will know I've been the most outspoken about our policies and our approach to dilapidated and abandoned buildings in this city for the last 4 years. The tool library, the initiative that I'm still part of, the movement that I'm still part of, the tool library, the lending library, the sharing economy, still very much a piece of the I don't know what you would call it, the MO or whatever, the modus operandi of me, but also our group of our community that has built this tool library here in St. John. We have been rallying around these initiatives for the past 4 years. It culminated on 96 Victoria Street, where we brought 47 people in on a weekend to gut a building that none of us owned, for the sole sake of trying to retrofit it and trying to get it ready for renovation to be affordable housing. Now, we were doing that in 2019, long before many people declared there was a housing crisis. And so then this Brown building comes up, the 99 King Street initiative comes up. And for those of you who don't know, I'll back up and try to explain that. There's a building on King Street East It's right on the corner of King and, oh my gosh, not Pitt, Carmarthen. Am I getting that right? Anyway, 99 King Street East, behind the JDI headquarters, owned by JDI. And their proposal was, let's tear it down. And they couldn't tear it down because it's part of our heritage district. And so I'm just making sure I can see everybody's comments here. Sorry, looks like I can, but if anybody wants to chime in and let me know, then I'll know for sure if I'm seeing comments. Just let me know if you're watching. I see there's at least 11 people watching across the different platforms. So anyway, so this proposal comes in, and in order for them to tear down this building, because it's a dilapidated, it's abandoned building. Thank you, Andrew Miller. Perfect. I know we're seeing people on Facebook at least. In order for them to do that, they have to de-designate this from the Heritage District. Why? Well, King Street East, big tourist area, lots of older buildings. It's a heritage district. There's lots of people that may disagree on heritage protected districts, whatever. That's the policy we have right now. That's what the city has valued, and that's what we're embracing. And there is certainly a ton of value in our heritage infrastructure. Let's just say that. But let's get to the specifics of this proposal. So in order for them to tear down this building that they say is beyond repair, they had to de-designate it from the heritage district, because our heritage bylaws very clearly say, in order to do that, in order to tear down a building in a heritage district, you got to list it for sale for at least 1 year. Now that's pretty fair. You know, in many cases you'd say, shit or get off the pot, man. Like, what are you going to do with this building? Do you want to use it or don't you? If you don't, try to sell it to somebody who does. Now, people will disagree with me on this, and it does come down to two philosophies. Do you believe that homes in the form of housing is a private, enterprising, entrepreneurship endeavor, or is it a public good? Is housing ours as a community, or does it belong to the individual? So very clearly, I will say housing is ours. It is our community's. Yes, so-and-so person may have spent the money to build that, but they're building a 100-year asset. It may outlive them. So anybody who builds a home, or sorry, it could be a 300-year asset. We have buildings in the city that are 150, 60 years old. In Europe, it's not uncommon to see 250-year-old buildings that are gorgeous and up to date and well kept. So I believe housing is a public good. It may be owned by an individual, but it has to flow through the lens of the community. We, the community, that are going to be caretakers of it, that are going to live in it, that are going to be there beyond the current owners, have to have a part to play in that building. So JDI buys this building, and in 2016, people are living in it. And then tenants get kicked out. There's concerns about repair. There's concerns about things. Now, here we are in 2022, looking at a proposal from JDI to tear the building down. First of all, they have to de-designate it, as I said, from the Heritage District, because they are not allowed to de-designate or to tear down a building without selling it first, putting it up for sale, which they didn't do. And so then the only way around that, in order to skirt the rules as it is, they've got to de-designate it. So they put in an application to de-designate it. We've never de-designated individual properties that I'm aware of. We've de-designated certain heritage districts. The Lower West Side used to have a heritage district, but we've never de-designated just a single house in the middle of a heritage district before. Certainly not one that's a corner lot that's been lived in the past 3 to 4 years and is salvageable. But they believe it's not salvageable. They believe it's beyond reasonable repair. Okay. So this is a real opportunity for council to pass judgment on what we believe is appropriate use for our buildings. I chose to speak out publicly. I chose to email people. I chose to spread the word. I chose to place my own belief, my own value set, my own judgment about a building in the forefront during that public hearing process. Now, I didn't necessarily know when I made those statements that I was going to have to really look at these two options. Do I stay or do I recuse myself? I had a sense that there was definitely going to be a timeliness to this application, but the legislation very clearly says that a council, a general council, a local council, must provide an applicant, any applicant, doesn't matter if it's Jane, whoever, who owns a single home, or corporation, whatever, who owns hundreds of homes. Our job is to provide the applicant with an unbiased process, which means it's like a judge. If you were on trial and a judge comes in and said, and a judge was heard, you know, off duty, as it were, saying something like, well, I know that they're guilty anyway, but I'll be the judge in that trial, no problem. You would be within your fair legal right to appeal that process because the judge had already weighed in on the value or the merit or the guilt level or whatever of that applicant, or sorry, in that case, defendant. So council's in a very similar situation where we have to provide the applicant with a fair process. Now, I couldn't do that. Full stop. I couldn't do that because there wasn't one piece of evidence, wasn't one thing the applicant could put on the table that would tell me this was a good idea. And I had said that as much. It's one thing for me to have these thoughts. It's another thing for me to say it publicly like a judge would, right? Nobody can police my thoughts, but my comments get to be policed. They get to be accountable, and I'm okay with that. As a matter of fact, I did so with the intention of being able to let the public know that there's a lot at stake here. So that was my take. And I continue to recuse myself from that vote because I do not think it is in council's best interest to have an appeal on the board where we could get drawn into a legal conflict with a multi-billion-dollar company with a GDP much more than our cities. There's not a GDP, sorry, but with a budget much larger than our whole city. I do not believe it was a worthwhile endeavor just for me to be able to vote, to be on the record and have that appeal drawn out. You may disagree with me. I arrived at my own conclusion on this. So that's why I recused myself, and I again recused myself from the whole vote. Council eventually decided to allow JDI to de-designate this building and to allow them to build a playground, which I believe is a completely token offering. I said that as much in my original comments. I still believe that to this day. We've got playgrounds within 600 meters of that place. Sure, nobody's going to say, nobody's going to say a playground's bad. But when you're in a housing crisis and you could house 4 families, we have some values we have to discuss. And unfortunately, from my side of the spectrum, from what I'm looking at it from, we decided to value the individual over the community. So whatever, this is it. This is done. It's gone. It's past. So that's one update I wanted to clarify. I know we're 14 minutes in. I wanted to give some nuance to that. I do not believe that was an easy thing for any of my council members to do. I do not believe that any of my colleagues around the horseshoe are bought by Irving. I've heard all kinds of comments. I don't believe they're in Irving's pocket. I think they're looking at it from different lenses than me, certainly. But this is just it, is we need to be able to have a constructive conversation on this. What are the values? What are the outcomes we're looking for? What powers do we have? And at the end of the day, it really did come down to what legislative powers do we perceive that we have as a municipality to target things like this, to do different things, to, produce different outcomes. Now, since I got on council, I've been pushing for a number of housing policy reforms. And I haven't been able to get nearly as far as I wanted to. No question about that. Part of that is because we don't have a culture here in St. John of councillors who have expertise or have ideas or who are able to come with new initiatives. We don't have that culture of accepting the councillor's perspective because we're so used to councillors being just haphazard, fly-by-night individuals who may be great people who have volunteered, but they're not experts. They're not well researched on these files to be able to propose alternatives that are viable. That's one cultural problem we have. And it's one that I've run up against. There's been at least 2 motions I brought to council where my colleagues around the table just simply said, hey, we want to hear from staff first before we accept this. The first motion that I brought was on asking the province to put forward a new ministry of housing and urban affairs. Why? Because right now the province holds the lion's share of responsibility for housing. They hold the lion's share of money. They have the most potential to align with the federal government to access money we currently cannot access to build housing. And they hold a lot of land use policy legislation that we can't change. I'll give you an example. Right now, if we wanted to go in and try to save a building that was dilapidated because the owner was negligent, we have the ability to do that under Section 137, Section 2, or Part 2 of the Local Governance Act, but we don't exercise it because we don't know what the province will actually reimburse us for. So it's an unknown. And when it's an unknown, there's risk. And when there's risk, you get 2 sides of a coin. One side says, let's try it and let's see where it gets us. The other side says, let's just be cautious and try to ask them and advocate for, a better outcome. Personally, my side is let's take the risk. We have 90 buildings on our abandoned housing, our dangerous and dilapidated buildings list. 70 some are abandoned, as far as I understand. Ottawa has 115. Ottawa has a population 10 times as much as ours. They're the nation's capital. They're a city nearly as old as ours. So I think it's high time we tried some really different approaches to try to save buildings, especially when we have those 90 buildings could add up to about 400 units made available to the community for renovation, for redevelopment. But they're not, because we cannot push the owner of those buildings to take action. The province could, and we could try and get the province on side with our own abilities, but we haven't. Now, that's not to say that our staff isn't working hard right now to try to figure out some answers to that, are not advocating on our behalf for that, and that we haven't started the process of trying to figure out what is the risk really involved, what are we looking at, what's the legal ramifications, all that. Our staff is doing that work. I simply personally wanted that to happen before we had all the answers to it, because it was a crisis. That's my take. We'll act, we'll see what happens, we'll get the best outcome we can, and if we have to change our policy afterwards because we learn new things, then we change the policy afterwards. But we can't sit here and wait in a holding pattern when we've got 1,400 people on a waiting list for affordable housing. So all of it ties in. It's a heritage issue, yes. But again, all of our plans, Zone SJ, Plan SJ, our municipal plans, all laid out very different purposes for that one lot of 99 King Street. And unfortunately, it didn't go our way. Council decided to allow the applicant to tear down the building, to de-designate the building. The applicant will now be allowed to just apply for a permit to tear it down without selling it, and then they'll come back with a proposal to build a playground there, from what we understand. And hey, that's where it's going to go. We gave it a good shot. I certainly tried to rally as many people as I could. So anyway, I don't want to go any longer into that. That's as nuanced as I want to go. If there's specific questions I didn't answer for people, great, let me know. I just want to, get into some of the broader topics. And let me just see what we're going on here. We got Debbie McCormick saying list at fair market value or list so that no one could afford to buy it. Again, the applicant was not forced to do that. There are no bylaws in place that force that to happen. They came with a de-designation application from the Heritage District, which means they don't have to list it for sale. If they wanted to tear it down, they would have to list it for sale for a year, but they found a way to skirt the rules. They found a weakness in our bylaws, and that's something we need to fix. And that's why we need people at the helm who understand these issues and who are going to try to close those gaps so they can't happen again. Because at the end of the day, if a multi-billion-dollar company can't afford to maintain homes for people during a housing crisis, who in God's name can, right? That's what it comes down to. For me, people can think differently. Certainly the Telegraph Journal thinks very differently. The Telegraph Journal, the editorials board, wrote some pretty scathing comments about this being a complete waste of time, complete inappropriate focus for council, and that it wasn't going to amount to anything anyway, and that it was just cheap populist politics. Well, let me ask you this. Does anybody on this stream think that getting 452 units on the market tomorrow for the 1,400 people that are waiting on our affordable housing wait list is cheap populist politics? I don't know. I certainly don't think it is. So if anybody else thinks that's cheap populist politics, write the Telegraph Journal editorials board and let them know you agree with them. If you don't, keep voting for people who don't believe in that. So anyway, that's the end on housing. Let's go on to something else. So Andrew Miller, just got a comment here. I know I said we're off housing, but let me just answer this one more question because one came up. Does this establish a new precedent? Yes, it does. Absolutely, it does. Because until you do something, until somebody wins at something, you don't have those fast followers. Now we have seen an applicant win at de-designating a heritage property that was fully capable of being repaired and turned back into housing. And we know the applicant had the financial means to do so. That's a precedent. That's something that my colleagues around the council are going to have to answer for. Yes, I didn't vote in that. My vote was to go and rally the public around this issue. I ran on it, and I knew that I was going to have to make a decision on it. And I chose to get as many people involved as I could. There were really amazing presentations made by individuals in our community about this and about the precedent as set. And unfortunately, it fell on deaf ears. It wasn't a majority vote by any means, or sorry, it was a majority vote, but it wasn't a landslide vote. It was a 6-5 vote. Sorry, what was it that night? I'm just trying to remember. There were two different votes. Part one and part two, first and second reading of those motions were passed 5-4. The second ones were passed 6-3 because they did change some of the agreements in the with the applicant on the playground. But again, they're going to have to answer to that. And I did my best to try to show council that there were dozens of people that cared about this. And I'll continue to do that. I may not act the same way. I may not put my comments out publicly the same way on every application, but I believe on this one it was worth it. And I believe on this one it's warranted. So it does establish a new precedent. And we are going to have more people come forward, I believe, with applications to de-designate their heritage properties so that they can just get away from the obligation that comes with heritage. And again, the obligation that comes with heritage is pretty profound, yes, but what it brings for value to our community is far and above that. You know, some of these heritage homes that we call heritage homes that are so expensive now were lived in by very meager earning people, you know, back in the 1880s and 1890s. But the way they built things back in those days, the craftsmanship, the attention to detail on facades was so different. And that is worth remembering. And there are stories about people and families and leaders in some of these buildings that is worth saving. And people come from all over the world to see some of these heritage pieces that are unique. And this building, the Brown Building, was the last remaining facade of its kind, of its era in our city. So it's gone, and it's gone for good. But anyway, let's get on to some other stuff. All right, politics writ large. I'm just going to open up Deborah McCormick, who's always on here. She's, obviously an advocate for a number of issues in our city, certainly seniors issues in our city. So I'll put this one up there. Water rates for low-income seniors are hindering their ability to remain in their homes. Yet $828,000 for a theater company. Do you believe that is fair and equitable decision-making? Absolutely, I do. It is absolutely fair and equitable decision-making. Why? Because the cost to trying to roll $440,000 of the money that went to the St. John Theatre Company could not be spent on any other type of initiative that we have at our fingertips. So let's just take that $828,000 that you're mentioning. Let's cut it in half, because it really is. Most of that money was from the wrap up of Discover St. John. And it can discover or develop. Sorry, I may be getting one of those two wrong. But when we closed off some of those tertiary city corporations, I'll call them, because I'm just not getting my words right now, but they had money that were only allocatable to certain initiatives, right? So $400 and some thousand could not be spent on water. It wasn't allowed. Legislatively, the money that had been allocated, that had come from different sources of government or funding partners, was meant for that department, in this case, tourism. So we're down to $400,000. $400,000 would not change the game in any meaningful way for water rates. Why does St. John have water rates that are so high? Well, it's important to note that we have power rates that are 10% less than our surrounding communities because of St. John Energy, because of the phenomenal work that they do. Our CEO, Ryan, is an amazing CEO, has been doing amazing work even when he was VP. They have hit home runs after home run. They're partnering with an Indigenous firm to build Birch Hill. They've got their own KVA transmission line. They've got charging stations that are coming through. There are plans for different initiatives. So our energy rates are 10% lower. Our water rates are higher. Why? Because we have 3 times as many lift stations to move water in this city in various forms as Moncton and Fredericton. So yes, our water rates are higher because of the geography, right? That's just something we can't change. They don't have those lift stations to have to move that. And I get it. The water rates are high. I live on a well. I used to live on city water. There are plans for introducing water meters. There are plans for bringing down the debt load of St. John Water. Let's not forget, we have some of the cleanest, most award-winning water in the country. I get that the water rates are high. There are alternatives that are being explored. We have brought up questions about giving different types of breaks to different people at different income levels. At the same time, let's not lose focus of the entire picture. Water rates are high, energy rates are low. Power outages for St. John Energy, 3 times less than NB Power. I hope I'm getting that number right. I'm pulling it out of my memory banks, but I know it's much less than NB Power. So I just think we need to talk about this in a full comprehensive manner. We know that what we have for infrastructure in our city is 3 to 4 times more than what is needed down the road in Moncton or Fredericton. How could we pay the same water rates when we have such a different lay of the land, right? We're trying to make up for it in other ways. We're trying to make up for it in, our transformation of transit. We're trying to make up for it in more accessibility in our city. We're trying to make up for it in our lower power rates. We're trying to make up for it. I mean, even just our city pedway system, right? I've heard from so many seniors who are so grateful that there's this interconnected pedway system where they can stay in one spot and still have accessible access to a number of city amenities. And you want to say, try living on $22,000 a year. I know how to live on $22,000 a year. I done it with my family 4 years ago. Okay, so I've done it with kids. I know it's not easy. I know you don't like my answer, but that's my answer. You may disagree with me. I just don't think, and I don't believe that water is the most pressing matter of our current paradigm. There are a number of issues, a number of fires that the city needs to put out, and we're doing our best with it. And it's not because we're not asking the questions, and it's not because we're not advocating for important changes. It is because it is a complex problem, and we live in a city with 3 times as much struggle to produce the same service as other cities. So we'll leave that one alone. Where are we at here? TJ, Graham Savage. The TJ editorial board always backs the family, but that doesn't make their opinion right every time. We need affordable housing, despite the fact that the Premier doesn't view the situation as a crisis. Moncton City Council is leading the way. Time for City of St. John to do the same. What can we do to help you, City Council and Mayor, make that happen? Well, let's get back into that for a second. It's pretty simple. We have an extensive affordable housing action plan that we are currently trying to roll out. You're right. Moncton City Council is in the lead on some forms of investment, right? So a few years ago, Moncton City Council invested $2 million. Just one second, everybody.
All the chickens are not in the coop, and I can see them, but I need help.
Okay. We're going to go for a quick break here. So apparently my chickens are out of their coop, and I am going to try to go help my wife get them back in. Usually they're in bed by now. I let them out earlier, and normally that's fine. But I'm just going to put a quick break up here, be 30 seconds, and we'll be right back after this. All right, who's still here? Sorry, everybody. This is not happened before. And of course, it would happen when we're doing a live stream. So apparently the door for the coop flung shut and they couldn't get back in. Anyway, so we're back, and we were just chatting about just some of this stuff around affordable housing in the city of Moncton. So a few years ago, the city of Moncton gifted Rising Tide, a local nonprofit, $2.1 million. Now, how could the city of Moncton do that and the city of St. John not do that? One, the city of St. John is 3 times the size of the city of Moncton, landmass wise. So we have to plow further, pave further, we have to service further, everything further. Who made us that way? The province, right? Thank you. Back in the day, back in the 70s, when they continued to, and 80s, when they continued to grow our borders. So that's just the reality. Nothing much we can do about that. 2, we have the presence of heavy industry, which devalues everything in our city. Everything in our city is devalued comparatively to Moncton. If you don't believe me, go look at Bob Jones' articles over the past 4 years. He has posted, and Jacques Poitras as well, they have posted multiple articles about sales of almost exactly the same building. It could be commercial, it could be a hotel, it could be residential. Compared to Moncton and Fredericton, and our buildings sell for less, even in similar places with similar servicing. But guess what? It costs us the same to plow the roads. It costs us the same to service the roads. It costs us the same to put in sidewalks. It costs us the same to deliver all kinds of things, to cut the grass, you name it. It costs us the same. But our buildings, the only way the city is able to build fiscal solvency is through taxation, is through us sharing our resources. People don't like taxes. I'm like, look, if we all lived in a community, would you rather have to be in charge of your own road and your own piece of the sidewalk and be forced to pay it, or have no sidewalk and have no one else participate with you? Or do you want to contribute to the common good, where we build the common good, where we build common things that we hold as a way of empowering all around us? Again, we're talking about philosophical differences, but what I'm trying to point out is that we do not have the same situation as Moncton. And we have been gifted with a very old city compared to Moncton, where a lot of our infrastructure is much older. And we've been gifted all this heavy industry, which devalues our properties. So there is a whole list of issues that we have been advocating for since 2017, 16 in a pretty concerted way. And since the trail report came out that revealed a lot of this stuff. And so the city of Moncton had money because they were growing and they didn't have this antiquated infrastructure and they didn't have this disadvantaged state that we had. So anyway, this was the reason that city of Moncton was able to contribute that money. And what Rising Tide did is they were able to go and find partners at the province and the federal level to get that pot of money up to $12.2 million. So $12.2 million went into Rising Tide to go and retrofit buildings, to rehab old stock and turn it back into affordable building. Now they had a number of 65 buildings. I think they've only done 22 to date. We'll see if they actually have the capacity organizationally to get this done. Point is, they are ahead, but for reasons that aren't necessarily replicatable by the city of St. John. So again, when we talk about equal opportunity, which is an important feature of our local governance agreement with the province says that it will provide equal opportunity to municipalities. I say you're not even close. Not even close. When a city can do that kind of work and another city couldn't dream of doing it, town, whatever, or even matching it on a per capita basis, you're not talking about equal opportunity. You're talking about unequal lay of the land, not taking into consideration the nuance in those respective communities. So again, it isn't working. We don't have a province that still is getting the message. And there are a number of ideas that could be put on the table And I've put forward a number of them at the council level. One, we need to create a minister of housing. Why? Because we have a minister of healthcare, and housing is just as important as healthcare. And the minister of healthcare has to get up in question period and be questioned about the outcomes of their department, what they're performing on, what they're not performing on, what they're going to do about it, what the problems are, what about this issue. But housing is buried under social development. And so the Minister of Social Development, which also has to answer for seniors issues, social work issues, and then youth issues, and people with disabilities, you name it, also has to answer for issues around housing. So again, it gets washed out. They're not up there answering specific questions about housing. Therefore, in cabinet, that entity that makes up this prominent decision-making body, that conversation's not happening. Not at a concerted way, right? So you get what you plan for, you get that kind of result, and we just don't have that kind of planning. And it's not because we haven't been asking for it. It's just because we haven't had governments that are courageous enough to try to do it. Instead, what have they been touting? Oh, well, we've balanced the budget. We have a surplus. We've paid down our debt. And it's like, listen, debt's not fun. No one likes debt. But why is it that the biggest contributor to our overall debt is NB Power? And we've been talking about reining in NB Power for a decade. They haven't done it. They've been continuing to pay CEO of NB Power $500 and some thousand a year to produce what? And they just fired Keith Cronkite, the recent CEO of NB Power. They're sitting on billions of dollars in debt. And they still want to hold back projects like our own municipal energy corporation, St. John Energy, is trying to be a leader in, because it's inconvenient to them and it makes them look bad. So let's just call those spades a spade. There's other issues, I know, but it's all related to housing, because until we have leadership for housing at the provincial level, or the alternative is to download housing authority to municipalities and properly fund municipalities to tackle housing, we're not going to get categorically different outcomes. Okay, on to the next one. Where are we at here? Andrew Miller again. The other reason for St. John sprawl was 40 years of not updating municipal plan. Absolutely. Plan SJ is our updated municipal plan. Plan SJ is an award-winning municipal plan, and we have some of the most permissive zoning in the entire country. Before the commentators, and I don't know if anybody else out there listens to the chattering class or they listen to the commentators about, these crises, the political commentators on podcasts and the news and all this stuff. I've been listening for the past 4 years, and I can tell you that the most celebrated municipalities in Canada right now are Edmonton, Kingston, a little bit in Winnipeg, and some pockets of issues that have come up in Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, for sure. But Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal are not touted as game-changing leaders on the issues. Places like Kingston and Edmonton de-zoned their entire city, basically. They just did away completely with exclusionary zoning. And that was a massive undertaking in their city, and it's led to huge results for them. They're certainly not out of the woods on the housing crisis, but they're in some pretty interesting success stories. Kingston has been tackling parking like no one's business. They have been out there de-parking streets, pedestrianizing streets, turning them into places where businesses want to come back to because people are walking by them, because people want to live by them, because people don't have to own cars near them. You name it. Kingston has been doing some pretty forward-thinking things that have demonstrated results over the past 5 years that also translate into housing. So, but why do I say all that? Because our municipal plan, before all those little pieces were celebrated, actually had some of the tools that we're seeing other municipalities celebrated for. In other words, we didn't get all the credit we deserved for Plan SJ. It was incredibly permissive zoning, very fast turnaround times for permits, you name it. But why don't we have the results? Because we didn't have the investment. Why didn't we have the investment? Because we didn't have the jobs. Why didn't we have the jobs? Because, again, it just like we lost the dock, federal investments weren't there. Regional sprawl, people could live outside the city and not have to pay the taxes of the city, but use the city, for the amenities as well as for the jobs. We don't have the types of industrial taxation that other municipalities have. So if you stick the city of St. John in any other province, its budget grows by $8 to $15 million a year. So what can you do with $8 to $15 million a year differently to produce those different outcomes? You can do quite a bit. So anyway, you're right. This is a long tangent, but that sprawl that was prevented by our municipal plan, Plan SJ, is important, and it's paying dividends for us now. And I promise you, if you stick around for the next 25 years and you look at the city of St. John and you look at Moncton, you'll find a city you want to live in, and you'll find a city you don't, and it won't be Moncton that you want to live in. That's for sure. When you go to Moncton right now, you see these really wide roads. You see them continuing to push the envelope for subdivisions, and subdivisions are subsidized by the poor regions of urban centers. Fact. If you don't believe me, do the research yourself. Go look at Urban 3. Go look at Not Just Bikes. Go look at Strong Towns, and go and find those fiscal solvency audits that they've done on cities across North America. And what you will find is that the poorest regions of cities, where the highest density is, subsidize the wealthiest regions of the city. Because when you're sitting on 3/4 to 3 acres of a plot of land that you've got to run 40 kilometers of pavement to, and 40 kilometers of pipe to, and 40 kilometers of plow truck drivers to service one house versus an apartment building of 400 people, you see the math problem, right? So that municipal plan was about building density, and Plan SJ was about building density, and it was about building cities for cities, not for rural communities. I come from a rural community, right? If you want to live in a rural community, I suggest you move to one. But I am certainly not going to, go in and try to undo those really important pieces of Plan SJ, which again, at the time, were award-winning and are paying dividends for us now. Now that the port is revitalizing, we're seeing new economic development opportunities. We're seeing new businesses want to come here. We're seeing new vibrant festivals and initiatives bring people here. People want to live in our core, and we've seen our core growing at the highest rate of any urban core in the country for the past 2 to 3 years. So it's paying off. It's not where we want it to yet, but it's paying off. Okay. Where are we at here? Councillor Killen is on here. Tell them about contributing to the Affordable Housing Action Plan consultation. And it's also very specific, not affordable housing really at all, just social housing. Right. So the Affordable Housing Action Plan was something that we spearheaded. I didn't mention this as much when we were talking about Moncton being ahead of the game on St. John. What we have differently than Moncton has is before we put any money into anything, we stopped and we said, let's do a bit of an audit. Where is it that we need to build the housing? What opportunities are there? What funding streams are there? What would be the comprehensive strategy to getting us to a place where we don't have 1,400 people on a wait list, right? What Moncton decided to do was take that heavy-hitting nonprofit development company I talked about, Rising Tides, and just pump them up on funding steroids and hope for the best. They did some sort of, initial assessment, but what our Affordable Housing Action Plan did was a deep dive. There are advantages to both, let's be honest, right? There's advantage to both. But our Affordable Housing Action Plan has come with 37 recommendations, and it's too much. It's pretty broad. But at the end of the day, it has a lot of pieces in it that we can grab, go find funding for, and try to and try to get up and running. You know, we're talking about investment incentives. We're talking about land use. We're talking about working across the provincial border with those different departments that have people on that affordable housing wait list. We're talking about identifying infill opportunities where they make the most sense. We're talking about putting housing where rapid transit is, where people who can save themselves $15,000 a year instead of owning a car can choose to live because there's access to 15-minute routes for transit. We're talking about all sorts of more nuanced lensing for our affordable housing action strategy. We haven't fully adopted it yet. Yes, it's come too late, no question. Yes, we should have had it 5 years ago. We weren't prophets, but here we are, and we have this now. And what our job now as council is to try to go back to that affordable housing action plan, sift through it, figure out what it is that is going to make those most important changes and try to get them to the forefront so we can resource the thing appropriately. Because honestly, you know, we had the affordable housing action plan had dozens of stakeholders who are invested in the important game. I shouldn't say game, but in the important initiative of solving the housing crisis in St. John. We had nonprofit developers, we had advocacy groups, homeless groups, lenders, developers, you name it, government, right? They were all there. The city, of course, academics, even. So we built that plan with all those stakeholders. And the point is like, council now needs to go through that and do our due diligence to figure out what can we resource. Because if we were to be able to resource that plan, it would probably cost 3 to 4 times as much as we're capable of funding it for. So then how do we find those resources? How do we find that money? How do we just be good coordinators around those ideas and those initiatives that the Affordable Housing Action Plan has identified, so that it's not just us pulling the weight. It is us just fully aligned, working well, working coordinated with, you know, the stakeholders in the city, Outflow, John Howard, our community centers, you know, places, even our churches. Like, I know the United Church has a big development they're trying to get off the ground on the north end, and they're taking a leading role at divesting themselves of green space, these big lawns that are just useless to them, and using the financial structure they have as a church in collaboration with CMHC to design buildings and get them built for affordable housing on church property. That's chef's kiss. That's phenomenal, right? But that has happened organically without the city providing that coordinating approach. So what can happen when we finally resource that coordination? We also have an affordable housing investment fund where we are funding each specific unit that is being devoted to affordable housing up to $15,000. Hope I'm getting that right. Hope it's not $10,000. Again, I'm not looking at a lot of notes here, so forgive me if I'm making that mistake, but I do believe it's $15,000. So anyway, it's an important change for us. We have $1.8 million in that fund right now. And as we continue to work and roll out this affordable housing action plan, there'll be new resources, new initiatives. We'll be talking about fast tracking permits. We're talking about, you know, an infill strategy, you know, advocating to the province for some of these nonprofit development companies, which can't access the capital that private developers can. But of course, nonprofit will give you affordable housing far easier than private investment companies will. So it's a broad one, and I thank you, Councillor Killen, for chiming in here. I'm just gonna go through the comments here. See Brian for SJ. It's not about lifestyle, it's about math. So, right, we're talking about how we build cities, who we build cities for, when we talk about density, it is about math, right? It's if you want the Moonlight Bazaar experience, if you want the Area 506 experience, if you want the container village, the city market, a connected pedway to, you know, a sports complex, a recreation complex, and you name it, you got to live in a densified city. You can't get that in St. George. You can't get it in Quispamsis. You're going to have to drive everywhere. So if you've got to drive anywhere, everywhere, you've got to add $15,000 a year to your bill. And if you've got to add $15,000 a year to your bill, what's your quality of life look like? Right? So it's just math. And it's hard for some people to understand when I talk about urban centers subsidizing poor neighborhoods, or sorry, poor neighborhoods subsidizing wealthier neighborhoods. But it's a fact. And it's a fact in St. John. And I know I'm working with a few other people who are much smarter than me, trying to map that density and that tax base and that contribution to the overall common good of the city. And our preliminary data shows the exact same thing that these other research organizations have done, which is show us that that is a fact. The urban center and the poorer communities by far subsidized wealthier neighborhoods, because wealthier neighborhoods live on bigger plots of land with fewer people living on it that are further away from the centers of service. So they cost 4 to 5 times as much, even if their buildings are valued at more. And even if the individual contributes more, the neighborhood doesn't. So it is about math. And so thank you, Brian, for building that up. Bob McEachran, you've got a couple of buildings here, or you got a couple of things. What game are we talking about? Are they? Do you think tearing down the Brown House was the right thing to do? No. And I mentioned that at the top of the hour. I'm not going to revisit here. Please go back and watch that. I spent 20 minutes trying to work through the nuance of it. It wasn't right. I fought for it. I rallied the people to try to come and speak against it. And because I did that, I had to step away and recuse myself based on the best advice we could get from our lawyer, because I didn't want the city of St. John held up in some appeal process with a multi-billion-dollar corporation that could afford to bury us in court, quite honestly. So anyway, you could say I'm a coward for doing that. You could say that I'm collaborative for doing that. I personally don't care. I made up my decision based on the facts I had. And I felt like rallying the public and recusing myself was the better approach. It didn't get me the outcome I wanted. You win some, you lose some. I tried my best, right? So, all right. Where are we at now? Brian, another one. Any ideas on how our Regional Service Commission, RSC, will be resourcing housing? None. So since the province came out with its approach to municipal reform a year ago, almost, we have been looking at this clause in the white paper that says they want regional service commissions. So just for people who don't know, our regional service commission right now looks after one thing, the dump, right? So we have a regional service commission in this area, and it includes Grand Bay, it includes St. John, it includes Rothesay, it includes Quispam and Hampton. I hope I'm not forgetting St. Martin's. I think St. Martin's might be in there too. I apologize if I am St. Martin's. But for some reason, I'm confusing whether our Economic Development Agency, which looks after St. Martin's for sure, also includes our Regional Service Commission. Anyway, we'll get that right in a minute. Still working on that. So regardless, right now, that Regional Service Commission looks after the dump. Basically, that's it. Some recycling stuff, but it's all based on, out of our waste management service. What the municipal white paper wants the Regional Service Commission to look after is regional cost sharing, housing, our social issues. So whether it be like, policing and mental health, like it suggests that there'd be a regional approach to these things. Our economic development. So that needs to be a regional issue now too. Even though we were already on the forefront of that and getting Envision off the ground, our province now wants the regional service commissions to take on a number of other initiatives. And it means scaling them up pretty majorly. And we have zero clues what they're going to fund us for. So, I mean, if the province is going to throw $80 million a year at our regional service commissions, maybe it makes sense to be able to staff up and have like a bit of a more a bit of a more regional approach on these different initiatives. On and on. That could make sense if you're going to resource it well. Because it can also work in collaboration with the other municipalities. Their budgets will stay the same, blah, 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 blah. Like, hey, you know, in my world, localized decision making and localized capacity is far more resilient and effective than centralized. And we see it in our healthcare right now as a major issue. And the province isn't even talking about that. All they're talking about is injecting more money into the centralized force that governs healthcare. And the problem is the healthcare system that Fredericton needs is not the healthcare system that St. John needs. But when you apply a blanket policy and decision-making body over the two, you get one-size-fits-all realities, in which case neither fits real well. And so I'm pretty convinced that decentralizing some of these entities is a good thing. And so I love some of this around the Regional Service Commission. I just don't know if they're actually going to resource it well. The province is sitting on $500 million in surplus, and we have we don't have any input into where that money gets spent, but we should. So it is absolutely an unknown to us, and I wish we did know. Almost a year later, we don't. Where are we at here? Nancy, North End needs more safe streets like crosswalks with flashing lights. You're right. 100%. So what's interesting about the North End is the main street that runs through it, Main Street, isn't owned by St. John. It's owned by the province. And Chesley Drive, not owned by St. John, owned by the province. Why? Because it's a secondary route for I'm forgetting the route number, Route 117. Why can I not remember that? Anyway, memory is terrible when I'm on camera and under pressure, apparently. But it's that route that goes through from Main Street down Chesley Drive that goes over Reversing Falls Bridge. It's owned by the province. There's not a lot of people that know that. But I'll tell you what, the city of St. John certainly knows it, because every time we want to do anything on that street, short of sneeze in the wind, we've got to ask permission. So it is, again, centralized decision making. Hey, let's give DTI authority over a road that runs through the middle of a fully functional city and put 6 lanes in it. The friggin' highway has 4 lanes. We put 6 lanes in the middle of the city and told people they should feel safe about trying to cross it. It's insane. So that's just one road. I know you're talking with other roads, Nancy. It's no question. Our road safety needs beefing up. And luckily, in the past year, phase 3 of Move SJ has been adopted by council. We've certainly tried to apply a more pedestrianized lens to it. Director Tim O'Reilly has had to do a lot with very little resources. And we now have that road safety strategy. Includes roundabouts. It includes new curbs. It includes better crosswalks. It includes narrowing crosswalks. So I know that my friends on the east side are always talking about that Loch Lomond crosswalk near the Schultons on the east side, because it's like 100 feet. And it's just like, you've got 9 lanes of road to cross the road. And there's a major residential area right across from there. It's insane. And so these roads are overbuilt for cars. They don't serve people well. They move cars fast. And we have some of the lowest commute times in the continent. So what problem are we solving by making it faster and easier for cars to get around? Not much. So adding these crosswalks is certainly part of that plan. Adding these flashing lights at these problem spots, shortening those distances, trying to redesign the roads so they work for people better. Our entire Main Street revitalization endeavor, which we're funding this year and building out and trying to narrow and redesign and, you know, bring in land that's around that main street area and try to develop it for people to live on, rather than it just being this industrial speedway that moves in two directions that people don't want to walk on or live near. Right? We want to change that culture on Main Street. We want that culture to permeate into the North End. It's all part of it. It's just, you know, give me $150 million and I still wouldn't have enough money to do all the things that we want to do with it. But there are some major opportunities in the North End. I continue to be outspoken about the need for a North End neighborhood plan, which of course would be about, you know, pedestrianizing that neighborhood even more. Because honestly, right now, the North End is really built for people, more so than most other cities. Again, if you go through the North End on a little walk and, you know, you end up at a little restaurant down there at the Lebanese Baker, or you end up down at Lansdowne Place to pick up a Tim Hortons coffee, and you walk back and you're on Victoria Street, and then you end up at Shamrock Park, or you end up like, it really is a people focused community. It's narrower streets, you know, there's a little bit more density, but there's so many empty lots. There's waterfront there, there's connectivity there, there's opportunity there, and any other city that was sitting on that would be completely different about or would have a completely different outcome with what happens there. But it's just because we've been so starved for investment. So the Old North End is certainly one of those ones that I continue to point at and say, look, from just the strictly good city building lens and perspective, that has to be the next spot. But it's not to say the Lower West Side doesn't have potential. It's not to say the rest of the North End doesn't have, you know, potential to be narrowed and to be pedestrianized. And again, that road safety strategy that's part of phase 3 of Move SJ includes the entire city, right? I'm talking with the Old North End specifically because you were. And I think there's some really interesting things we're going to do there with that neighborhood plan. But the East Side, my goodness, there's a ton of spots on the East Side that we need to make more friendly and make more accessible for people. Because at the end of the day, who cares if it takes me 5 more minutes to get home because I had 2 extra red lights or a crosswalk, right? If it means that people want to walk more, if it means that people feel like they're in a neighborhood more. Anyway, that one's that. We're over an hour. So let me see if there's anybody else commenting here that I haven't gotten to yet. Debbie brings up a big one. Have you traveled down the Boar's Head Road recently? Incomplete is a tragedy waiting to happen. Good news has been recently announced for the Boar's Head Road. That is certainly getting some attention in the most recent capital. My gosh, my words when I'm on camera here flying off the cuff. But we have the finance committee, which is looking at our capital plan right now, our 2-year capital plan for new expenditures, and the Boar's Head Road certainly is getting some attention on that. So too late for sure, but here we are. It's coming. So that one's on the way. Brian, again, someone who's been talking a lot tonight. North End has huge potential. Includes street level commercial. Yeah, there's already actually 4 buildings in the Old North End that are zoned already for street level commercial, but they're abandoned. So we need to close those gaps on abandoned buildings, dilapidated buildings, because we're sitting on gold. We're sitting on opportunities for redevelopment. We just don't have the tools we need to get people who are holding and speculating on property and land and homes and business opportunities. We don't have the tools to push them to either do something or get off the pot, like I said earlier. So that's an issue. Okay, well, an hour in, an hour and 10. Very great chat tonight. I appreciate everybody chiming in. I didn't see any comments come from Twitter, so I apologize to anybody on Twitter. I'm going to circle back there, sometimes this program that I use hasn't shown me Twitter comments in the past, so I don't really know why that is. I know that I'm streaming on Twitter. I did see that pop up, but I'm going to sign off for now. I'll check Twitter and see if I can figure that out, and I'll just try to respond to any questions you might have had there in text. And you can always email me at brent.harris@stjohn.ca. And from me out here in Martinon, and the chickens are now safe in bed. So that was a whole ordeal earlier where I had to leave you guys for 45 seconds. I hope that was no more than that. They're good, so don't worry about the chickens. And we'll be talking again soon. Have a good night, everybody.